In the annals of cinema, there exists a film that critics dismissed as puerile farce, audiences laughed off as lowbrow humor, and intellectuals quietly feared. Yet, as the years pass, its script reads less like slapstick and more like scripture, its absurdities less satirical than eerily, uncomfortably plausible. This film, Idiocracy, is no mere comedy. It is an oracle, a blunt-edged vision of civilization's decay, disguised as crude entertainment. Mike Judge, its unlikely prophet, penned a dystopian fable whose predictions are now bleeding into the seams of reality. For beneath its vulgar veneer lies a chilling hypothesis that humanity's future, far from ascending on a golden arc of progress, might instead spiral downward into a swamp of ignorance, consumerism, and decadence. That intelligence, once celebrated, might wither, supplanted by blaring screens, simplified slogans, and the relentless, numbing rhythms of instant gratification. The world of Idiocracy is one where the seeds of convenience, populism, and anti-intellectualism have borne their fruit, and that fruit, it turns out, is rotten to the core. Idiocracy imagines an America centuries from now, where society has devolved into a neon wasteland of brand worship and vacant minds. The intelligent have faded from the gene pool, outnumbered by the prolific and the oblivious, and what remains is a populace as dumb as it is self-assured. Their culture is a parade of garish spectacles and lowest common denominator entertainment. Their politics a farcical theater of machismo and empty promises. This is a world where crops are watered with energy drinks because they've got electrolytes, where the president is a former wrestler who governs by charisma and firepower, and where the highest aspiration of the average citizen is to laugh along with "Ow my balls," the nation's favorite televised assault on the male anatomy. I know it's easy to get confused, but we're still talking about the movie. The protagonist, an ordinary man of average intelligence, finds himself catapulted 500 years into this grim tableau, and suddenly discovers himself to be the smartest person alive. His presence, a throwback to a more rational age, becomes an affront to this new world order, where complexity is the enemy, intelligence a liability, and ignorance the new normal. But was it truly satire, or was it prophecy? For as we look around at the present, what do we see? A world where bluster beats competence, where science has been reduced to which talking head can give a nice-sounding explanation of concepts they don't really even understand, where the loudest voices drown out the wisest minds, public health and freedom seen as enemies, reality contested by conspiracy, politicians doubling as celebrities, or vice versa, truth cheapened, packaged, and sold, the degradation of discourse, the veneration of spectacle, the creeping acceptance of idiocy in high places. Judge's dystopia is unfolding before us, step by misstep, meme by meme, cabinet appointment by cabinet appointment. Idiocracy, then, is no mere film. It is an artifact, a warning cast in low-budget celluloid and shrugged off as dumb comedy by a public unready for its message. Like Nostradamus scribbling his quatrains in an age unprepared to understand, Mike Judge left us a vision that could have been prevented, if only we had the will, if only we had the wisdom. Instead, we are following its trajectory, not with dread, but with a shrug, lulled by the comfortable glow of our screens. And if this course remains unchanged, Idiocracy will not merely be a prophecy. Perhaps it will be an epitaph. For now, as if from the fevered dreams of Mike Judge himself, emerges the cabinet of 21st century America, a congregation of appointees seemingly conjured from the pages of Idiocracy's prophecy. Each one a character sketched in broad strokes, a caricature come to life. In a time when governance should demand intellect, stability, and principle, we are instead presented with this, a bizarre carnival of notoriety, image, and hollow charisma. Each appointee brings not just a lack of qualifications, but a flaunting of them, a peculiar pride in ignorance, controversy, and populist appeal. This is leadership by spectacle, a lineup that would make President Camacho grin with pride. Let us examine this tableau, each figure a brushstroke in a portrait of national decline. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, as the diplomat of platitudes. Once upon a time, the Secretary of State was an architect of foreign alliances, a strategist with a deep grasp of global dynamics. Now, in the prophecy's fulfillment, we have Marco Rubio, a man whose experience with diplomacy begins and ends at the soundbite level, where substance is sacrificed at the altar of sloganeering. Rubio is the diplomat of the Twitter age, a man for whom complexity is an inconvenience and nuance is for the weak. In his hands, the delicate art of international relations is reduced to smile and wave photo ops and boilerplate declarations of freedom and strength, offered up like snacks to a public that cares less about substance than about the show. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, as the armchair general. In Idiocracy's vision, security is a matter of chest thumping, a theater of bravado performed for a nation hungry for macho rhetoric but bereft of critical thought. And so enters Pete Hegseth, a man whose military experience is eclipsed by his cable news persona, a veteran-turned-pundit whose grasp of strategy is mostly rhetorical. In his world, defense isn't about measured caution, international cooperation, or complex logistics. It's about loud proclamations of power and simple-minded solutions to complex conflicts. The Pentagon, under his watch, becomes a set piece, a place where policy is crafted not by seasoned experts, but by the whims of someone who has mastered the fine art of talking tough from a television studio. Matt Gaetz, Attorney General, as the guardian of lawlessness. If Idiocracy taught us anything, it's that the rule of law becomes a mockery when entrusted to the rule of the loudest. Enter Matt Gaetz, a man with a public record more colorful than his legal acumen, known less for his legislative achievements than for his brushes with scandal and his penchant for grandstanding. Gaetz, as Attorney General, is the ultimate inversion of justice, a legal system where the lines blur between defendant and prosecutor, where the courtroom is a stage and law is reduced to the art of owning your opponents. Justice, once blind, now peeks through one eye, smirking and ready to deliver a verdict based on polling numbers rather than principles. Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, as the Queen of Optics. In Idiocracy's landscape, security is redefined as the art of appearing secure. Enter Kristi Noem, a leader whose experience lies not in the gritty details of national security, but in the polished theater of image management. Noem's security is one of optics, a Homeland Security department that exists as much for Instagram as for actual threats, where border walls and flashy statements stand in for nuanced policies. Noem governs not with substance, but with symbolism, reassuring the masses with photo ops and patriotic one-liners and terrifying personal anecdotes, while the true complexities of Homeland Security are left unexplored and unresolved. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, as the Maverick Mystic. The role of the Director of National Intelligence was once meant for a seasoned analyst, someone who could parse data and predict threats in a world of shadows and shifting alliances. Now it belongs to Tulsi Gabbard, a figure whose controversial positions often seem at odds with established policy, a maverick more inclined to follow her instincts than the advice of experts. Gabbard's intelligence apparatus will be one of gut feeling and personal crusades, a throwback to a time when espionage was less about careful strategy and more about intuition. Intelligence, in her hands, becomes less an art of insight and more an echo chamber for the unconventional and the unverified. Elise Stefanik, Ambassador to the United Nations, as the populist diplomat. Once a platform for diplomacy, the United Nations now receives Elise Stefanik, a woman whose approach to international relations is as simplified and partisan as her stump speeches. Stefanik's mission isn't to build consensus or foster peace. It's to promote a populist brand of diplomacy, one that reduces global issues to America First cliches. In her hands, the UN is no longer a place for multilateral engagement, but a stage for self-righteous sermons. A place where the art of diplomacy is abandoned in favor of cheering crowds and one-size-fits-all solutions. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services, as the Crusader of Pseudoscience. And now, as if summoned from Idiocracy's most outlandish predictions, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the vaccine skeptic tasked with overseeing public health. This is a ministry of misinformation, a department of health led by someone who would rather question science than uphold it. Kennedy's public health initiatives will likely be campaigns of fear dressed as liberation, his policies founded not on evidence, but on ideology. Under his reign, medicine itself becomes suspect, and the careful work of scientists is thrown into the dustbin of elitism. This is health by conspiracy, science by suspicion, a reality once too absurd to imagine. Scott Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, as the hedge fund manager of the masses. The Treasury, once a bastion of economic stewardship, now welcomes Scott Bessent, whose qualifications rest not in public service but in private gain. In Idiocracy, currency itself had lost meaning, and here we see why the financial system is re-engineered not for stability, but for short-term gains and speculative gambles. Bessent's treasury will be driven not by fiscal responsibility, but by market instincts, a casino of public assets in which the stock ticker dictates policy. National debt, inflation, inequality, all reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet as finance becomes not a public good, but a game for the profit-minded few. Doug Burgum, Secretary of Energy, as the pioneer of technological myopia. For Idiocracy, energy is not about sustainability or innovation. It's about feeding a consumer culture that craves instant solutions. Doug Burgum, with his simplistic, let's just build it bigger approach, represents this ethos perfectly. Renewable energy, climate science, and sustainable policy are merely annoyances in his vision. Expect policy directives that read like infomercials for the latest tech gadget, where the environment is a theoretical concern at best, and energy is reduced to what keeps the lights on for now. After all, if it works in North Dakota, why wouldn't it work everywhere else? Sid Miller, Secretary of Agriculture, as the cowboy of cronyism. Finally, Sid Miller, the Secretary of Agriculture who seems more suited to a BBQ pit than a policy office. His agriculture is a folksy blend of tradition and nostalgia, where science takes a backseat to populist whims. Like Idiocracy's citizens irrigating crops with energy drinks, Miller's policies will favor the loudest voices, the flashiest solutions, and the simplest slogans. Soil science, climate resilience, sustainable farming, these are complications he has no patience for. Instead, he will deliver the food system America deserves, fast, cheap, and deeply unsustainable. And so, assembled in this grotesque mockery of leadership, we have the Idiocracy Cabinet, a council of the absurd, each figure a distortion of their office, each policy a cartoon of governance. Together, they embody the prophecy's final act, a government where expertise is sacrificed for optics, where intelligence is drowned out by sound bites, and where America drifts, not toward progress, but toward the lazy allure of easy answers and hollow spectacle. It is a tableau as darkly comic as it is tragic, a vision of a nation standing at the precipice, entertained by its own decline. And as history's great satirists look on, perhaps they will recognize in this cabinet a new chapter in the grand narrative of folly, a cast of characters worthy not just of ridicule, but of warning. For in them, we see not just ourselves, but the nation we may yet become, if laughter remains our only response to the slow creep of idiocracy.